From the Columbia University Language Resource Center, this is Said and Done, the podcast about languages and the people who speak them. This is Said and Done. I'm Chris Kaiser, and today I'd like to look back on an interview that I did 6 months ago with Yuri Shevchuk, who teaches Ukrainian here at Columbia. At that time, Russia's incursion into Ukraine had just begun, and I was eager to learn more about some of the cultural dynamics that were in play, specifically around the issue of language. I'd like to replay 2 clips from that conversation because I feel that they illustrate some of what Ukrainians feel is at stake and what they believe themselves to be defending. As I record this now, the tide of the conflict seems to have shifted in the Ukrainians' favor with the recent recapturing of thousands of square kilometers of land. Whether this will hold is anyone's guess. But it seems that the victories that do take place do so in part because of, as Yuri says in the interview, Ukrainians believe themselves to have something to defend, and because, as he also says, that language is the citadel of identity, a deeply personal cause worth fighting for. I also wanted to return to this conversation in particular because it illustrates, in the kind of maximum conceivable scenario, what the stakes of language truly are. That's really the mission and purpose of this podcast, to demonstrate in example after example that language is indeed at the very core of the human experience and is the medium through which we know and understand everything about the world. And that studying a language is really about unlocking new dimensions of experience and knowledge that would otherwise have remained hidden. In this first clip, I ask Yuri about the relationship between Ukrainian and Russian in Ukraine, how a person chooses which language to speak, and how that's changed since the war has started. Here's the first clip of me speaking with Yuri Shevchuk back in early March 2022. So if you're in Kiev and you're moving, say you're touring the city, before, and you would speak to a person to buy a bus ticket, or you'd speak to somebody to, go to a restaurant, what language would you use? What language would be spoken? Or maybe what mixture of languages would be spoken?
Well, that depends. I never speak anything but Ukrainian when I'm in Ukraine, whether it's Kyiv, Odessa, or Kharkiv. As a matter of principle, I don't need to speak any other language in Ukraine. Ukrainian is the language of the country. But mostly people, a normal person, would speak the language that does not provoke discomfort or a negative reaction towards him.
And what would that be?
Very often in heavily Russified parts of Ukraine, that would be mockery. Why do you insist on speaking Ukrainian? Why do you demonstratively speak Ukrainian? All kinds of things. But people, Ukrainians, generations of them, grow up kind of very carefully listening to their environment and deciding how to behave communicatively to preclude that kind of an aggression. So, for instance, if the default language in Russified areas of Ukraine, they would, as a default language, would use Russian. Because that way they kind of strategize that there would be no aggression back in response. Even in areas that are traditionally Ukrainian, speaking Russian involves no aggressive reaction. In Lviv, you can speak Russian and no aggressive reaction would ensue. But not so, for instance, up until very recently. Now the situation is very quickly changing. Russian has come to symbolize the brutality, the barbarism, the barbarity of Russia and Russian aggression, because they are killing their own people they call their brothers, people they supposedly are defending Russian speakers. They are now indiscriminately bombing Kharkiv, where Ukrainian can hardly be heard in the streets. It's all Russian.
Yeah.
So this is an education, a very cruel education for those people. And there is a kind of a sea change when people say, I am from now on, I will, out of principle, never utter a Russian word. And up until today, I spoke Russian. It's my mother tongue. So for them, it's a matter of principle, of kind of their own kind of contribution into fighting for their dignity, not to speak Russian.
So let me kind of repeat back to you what I've understood, and if you disagree, let me know. It seems to me like many people in Ukraine have a kind of dial where they can dial up Russian, they can dial down Ukrainian, or they can dial up Ukrainian and dial down Russian. Is that kind of how you perceive it?
Yep.
Based on kind of the social circumstances
Yes.
in which they find
Yes.
themselves.
The history of the Ukrainian nation is such that they grow up almost with an inbuilt kind of radar for danger, and the capacity to conform with the environment, to survive.
Yeah.
You can hate it, and you can hate Ukrainian as the most conforming, nation on earth, but you can also love it because if it were not for this, Ukrainian would have not been around any longer, if they were not prepared to kind of merge with the environment and not stand out.
It's interesting to me that you've described that there are some people who, as you said, consider themselves to be mother tongue Russian living in Ukraine, now speaking Ukrainian as of the last month. And, what Ukrainian are they speaking? Have they known it? Do they speak it really as a second language? How's that playing out?
That depends. For instance, there was a kind of attitude. I'll better speak good Russian than butchered Ukrainian, and that was a generally accepted attitude. And now it's changing. They say anything, even the most horribly butchered Ukrainian, is poetry to our ears than the most correct Russian. Don't kid yourself. You will never learn to speak Ukrainian without butchering it. So butcher it to your heart's pleasure, because otherwise you will never speak it. You will never learn it. And that's correct. That's exactly what I say to my students here at Columbia. Check your shame at the door.
Yeah.
We are shamelessly butchering language. We embrace mistakes. Without mistakes, there is no learning a language, and that's the way to go. And don't forget the word excuse me or sorry. There's no apologizing for mistakes. Not in my classroom, because there's nothing to apologize.
Yeah.
It's just natural. And so now, again, these attitudes, this kind of language ideology is changing.
Yeah.
How you go about language, how you view language, and how far you are prepared to go to master it.
As it seems like the Ukrainian language right now is in a state of flux. It's changing. People are speaking Ukrainian who weren't speaking it before. So as you look ahead, what do you imagine will happen with the Ukrainian language? Do you imagine that more people will want to continue to speak it? How does it play out in the future in your mind?
Well, ironically, thanks to very cruel irony, Putin turned Ukrainian into this last refuge of security, even for the fact that Russians do not understand Ukrainian, the communications in Ukrainian, but also the sense when you speak Ukrainian, you feel psychologically that you are with your people. You are with your country. And even Russian speakers feel discomfort now. Without anybody telling them, they feel discomfort and a sense of betrayal that they speak Russian now.
Yeah.
And that's thanks to Russian aggression. In an ironic kind of way, Putin accelerates or accomplishes what many generations of Ukrainian cultural figures or presidents could not accomplish. Kind of facilitate and speed up the formation of the Ukrainian nation, a political nation that embraces everybody who recognizes a certain set of values, and one of those values is the value of the Ukrainian language.
In the second clip, Yuri is describing the dictionary that he wrote, which is a Ukrainian English collocation dictionary. I asked him whether recent events caused him to view this project in a different light. His response was a definitive no, and that he wrote this dictionary knowing what was going to come. He then shared what I felt was a heart-moving defense of what it means to know and speak a language, and it is that thought on which I would like to leave you today. You started this project really, it seems quite a while ago, and it has come to fruition in the last year you published this. So as you look at this project and you look at the events of spring 2022 and what's happening in Ukraine right now, has that caused you to rethink about this project or to reflect on it in a different way, or for it to take on a different meaning than it had before, or perhaps there's a continuity there?
It's surprising how my general optic and intention how to present things was anticipatory of what would come now. I'm reading through entries like politics or Russification or other such things that are pertinent to the Russian aggression. And they are almost, they sound as if they were written now.
Wow.
Not then. Because to me, it was only a matter of time for the Russian Empire to take its last stand and try to take the rest of the world together with it to the inferno of the past, because it would not collapse without a fight, without trying to provoke a third world war. And so I remember one of my friends in Kiev wrote an introduction to the dictionary. There's an extensive introduction to the dictionary, and she said, "Oh, this is very anti-Russian." And I personally didn't take it as anti-Russian at all, because I simply discuss certain things that cannot be understood in the Ukrainian language outside the context of Russian policy of Russification and relentless assimilationist pressure on the Ukrainian language, with the ultimate goal of eliminating it, of destroying it, of relegating it to the past, to history, because that was one single thing that prevented Russians from absorbing Ukrainians.
Was the separate language, the separate culture, the separate identity.
Exactly. The culture, you can verbalize the culture in any other language, the way Irish verbalize their culture in English. But language is such a citadel of your identity, such a source of feeling special, and special in the best sense of the word, that as long as it exists, the conqueror can vanquish you militarily, but you will never disappear. That's why, to me, language is singularly important for Ukrainian identity. You cannot be Ukrainian without the Ukrainian language. That's as simple as that.